Hello students, welcome back. So last class we had done half the notes of the chapter An Empire Across Three Continents. Today we will look into the economic expansion of the Roman Empire. The empire had a substantial economic infrastructure of harbors, mines, quarries, brickyards, olive oil factories, etc. Wheat, wine, and olive oil were all traded and consumed in large quantities, and they came mainly from Spain, the Gallic provinces, North Africa, Egypt, and to a lesser extent also from Italy, where conditions were best for all these crops. Liquids like wine and olive oil were transported in containers called amphorae. The fragments and shards of a very large numbers of these amphorae have survived, and archaeologists have been able to construct the precise shape of these containers. The Spanish producers succeeded in capturing markets for olive oil better than their Italian counterparts, and this could have only happened if the Spanish producers supplied better quality at lower prices, like anywhere. The empire included many regions that had a reputation for exceptional fertility. Italy, Sicily, Egypt, and southern Spain were among the most densely settled, or you can say the wealthiest part of the empire. The best kind of wine, wheat, and olive oil came mainly from numerous estates of these territories. On the other hand, large Roman territories were in a much less advanced state. The pastoral and semi-nomadic communities were often on the move, carrying their oven-shaped huts with them. As Roman estates expanded in North Africa, the pastures of those communities were drastically reduced, and their movement became very tightly regulated. Diversified application of water power around the Mediterranean, as well as in the advances of water power mining technology, the use of hydraulic mining techniques in Spain, in the Spanish gold and silver mines, and the gigantic industrial scale on which those mines worked. The existence of a well organized commercial and banking network and the widespread use of money are all indicators of Roman economy. Slavery was also an institution that was deeply rooted in the ancient world, both in the Mediterranean and in the Near East. And Christianity, when it emerged as the state religion, seriously challenged this institution. Under Augustus, there were still 3 million slaves in a total Italian population of 7.5 million. So, controlling the slaves and workers, slavery was an institution deeply rooted in the ancient world, both in Mediterranean as well as in the Near East. Christianity emerged as the state religion and challenged the institution. Under Augustus, there were 3 million slaves in a total Italian population of 7.5 million. Slaves were an investment. Slaves were an investment, and at least one Roman agricultural writer advised landowners against using them because their health could be damaged by malaria. On the other hand, if the Roman upper class were often brutal towards their slaves, ordinary people sometimes show much more compassion. Or warfare became less widespread, and the establishment of peace in the first century, the supply of slaves tended to decline, and the users of slave labor, sorry, and the users of slave laborers, sorry, and the users of slave labor thus had to turn either to slave breeding or to some cheaper substitutes like wage labor, which was more easily dispensable. Free labor was extensively used on public work because an extensive use of slave labor would have been very expensive. The slaves had to be fed and maintained throughout the year, which increased the cost of holding this kind of labor. Management of labor by Columella. The Roman agriculture writers paid a great deal of attention to the management of labor. Columella is a first century writer who came from the south of Spain, and he recommended some points. Landowners should keep a reserve stock of implements and tools, twice as many as they needed, so that the production could be continuous. Loss in slave labor exceeds the cost of such items. There was a general presumption among employers that without supervision, no work could ever get done. And so, supervision was paramount or important for both free workers as well as slaves. To make the supervision easier, workers were sometimes grouped into gangs or smaller teams. Columella commended squads of 10, claiming it was easier to tell who was putting in the effort and who was not in the groups of 10. This shows detailed consideration of the management of labor. Pliny the Elder, he is the author of a very famous natural history. He condemned the use of slave gangs and said it is the worst method of organizing production because slaves who worked in gangs were usually chained together by their feet. That is very sad. The elder Pliny described conditions in the factory of Alexandria. A seal is put upon the workmen's aprons, and they have to wear a mask or a net with a close mesh on their heads. And before they're allowed to leave the premises, they have to take off all their clothes. Agricultural labor must have been fatigued and disliked the system, so Egyptian peasants deserted their villages in order not to engage in the agricultural work. The same was probably true for most of the other factories and workshops. A law of 398 referred to workers being branded so that they could be recognized if and when they ran away and tried to hide. Many private employers cast their agreements with workers in the form of debt contracts. A lot of the poorer families went into debt bondage just in order to survive. Parents sometimes sold their own children into servitude of periods of 25 years. The late 5th century emperor Anastasius built built the eastern frontier city Dara in less than 3 weeks. by attracting labor from all over the East by offering high wages. Social hierarchies or divisions in Rome. The social structure of the empires follows the senators, equites, that is, the horsemen and the knights, the respectable section of the people, that is, middle class, lower class, and then finally the slaves. In the early 3rd century, when Senate numbered around 1,000, approximately half of all the senators still came from Italian families, and the late empire, by the late empire, the senators had merged into a unified and expanded aristocracy. The middle class now consisted of the considerable mass of people connected with the imperial services in the bureaucracy and the army, but also the more prosperous merchants and farmers, of whom there were many in the eastern provinces. Below them was the vast mass of the lower classes, collectively known as humiliores. They comprised a rural labor force, which many were permanently employed on the large estates. Workers in the industrial and mining establishments, migrant workers who supplied much of the labor for the grain and olive harvest and for building industry, self-employed artisans, etc. One writer of the early 5th century tells us that the aristocracy based in the city of Rome drew annual incomes up to 4,000 pounds of gold from their estates. This is without counting the produce that they consumed directly. The late Roman bureaucracy, both higher and middle, was a comparatively affluent group because it drew the bulk of its salary in gold and invested much of this in buying up assets like land. This was, of course, also a great deal of corruption, especially in the judicial system and in the administration of military supply. If you look at the cultural transformation of Roman world from 4th to 7th century, the traditional religious culture of the classical world, that is both Greece and Rome, they had been polytheistic. That means they worshipped more than one god. It involved a multiplicity of cults, included both Roman and Italian gods like Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, Mars, and also many Greek and Eastern deities worshipped in thousands of temples, shrines, and centuries throughout the empire. At the cultural level, the period saw momentous developments in the religious life, with the Emperor Constantine making Christianity the official religion. Overexpansion had led Diocletian to cut back by abandoning territories with little strategic or little economic value. Diocletian also fortified the frontiers. He reorganized the provincial boundaries, and he separated civilian from the military functions so that he could grant greater autonomy to the military commanders, and they now became a much more powerful group. The monetary system of the late empire broke with the silver-based currencies of the first 3 centuries because the silver mines were exhausted and the government ran out of sufficient stocks of metal to support a stable coinage in silver. So Constantine found the new monetary system on gold, and there were vast amounts of it in the circulation. Constantine Chief innovations were in the monetary sphere, where he introduced a new denomination, the solidus, a coin of 400.5 gram of pure gold that in fact outlasted Roman Empire itself. Solidis were minted on a very large scale and their circulation ran into millions. Thereafter, area of innovation was division of Roman Empire into east and west, and creation of the second capital at Constantinople, which is surrounded by three sides by sea. In the west, the empire fragmented politically because of the Germanic groups from the north, which took over all the major provinces and established kingdoms that are best described as post Roman kingdoms. By the early 7th century, the war between Eastern Rome and Iran had flared up, and the Sasanians, who ruled Iran in the 3rd century, they launched a wholesale invasion of all the major eastern provinces, including the Egypt. So with this, I'm going to end the chapter here. You all know you all are going to write down these notes. If you all have not already, jot down the missing points or you can mark them in your textbook. Just make sure you have all the points that we are discussing here. With this, I end this class. Stay home, stay safe, take care, and keep learning.